Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Hell is for Children, a Blog Talk Radio program for and by protective mothers with your host, Geerte Franken. So what's a protective mother? A protective mother tries to protect her child or children from their abusive father by many means necessary. Yes, you can call in. Are you ready? Operation Expose continues.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Hell is for Children. This show is on every Saturday at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, and the call-in number is 347-850-1243. I would like to thank Bobby Biesinger from World Integrity News Network for providing us with this platform that allows anyone who has input on the topic of protective mothers and can think along with us towards solutions to have their voice heard. And in light of Mother's Day tomorrow, I have two very special guests on today, namely protective mother Miriam Silver and her son Brian, and they will each share their experience of what it was like to be forcefully separated from each other for a period of 8 years. Miriam Silver is the author of Protecting My Child, How a Mother Tries to Protect Her Son and is placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. And she's also the founder of FACTS, Family Against Court Travesties. So I'm so honored to have her on, and particularly also her son Brian, who is a survivor of court-ordered abduction and now an adult. So without further ado, let's see if Miriam and Brian are here with us. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
hi, yes.
Thank you for having me on.
Hi, both of you. Thank you so.
On.
Thank you. Welcome to the show. And you have no idea how much respect I have for you both, and really happy to have you both on to share your story. So let's start with that story, and we'll start with Miriam. Miriam, the title of your book is shocking. You tried to protect your son, and you were placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. How did you end up in that outrageous situation?
You want me to begin at the beginning of how I had to protect my son?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Well, like many women, I had a divorce from a man that I felt was abusive to me. And at first I thought everything would be fine because I thought, well, at least he's my children's father, and I have a daughter, but he was her father for almost 13 years as well. I never thought he would do anything against my children. I did find right away that there was money hidden, and I went to an attorney, and the attorney said, yes, it was true, and I should go back to court. I mention this because, like many women, I was really angry in the beginning, and I felt I had been treated very wrongly. Well, little did I know that this would become a nightmare. And all of a sudden, I started being called to court myself, being sued in civil court by my ex-husband. I then started to go through years of stalking and harassment and tricks, and it just kept escalating. Meanwhile, I did drop the lawsuit for the money because it really wasn't worth it, and I just wanted things with my son and my husband and everything to be calm. We needed to both go on with our lives. Like many mothers, I documented everything. I kept every written notice, every court report, every police report, so on and so forth. Eventually, it really got out of hand, and one day I was driving. I had to go to a friend's house, and I was on a cul-de-sac, and the next thing I knew, I was blocked in that street by my ex-husband and his partner. I did have to call the police to help me escape, And my ex left then, and the partner went and got a restraining order against me that very day. And I knew by the many tricks that already happened, and I know a lot of women will relate to this because we all have such crazy stories that only we understand each other's crazy stories. But within a week, sure enough, as I was bringing my son to school, he was, I think, in 4th grade by then. I was walking in with him and a friend. It was, and I didn't see my ex. He wasn't supposed to be there. I had custody of my son that day. And the next day I know him and his partner jumped out behind a car, followed me to school, then had the police called, showed them they had gotten a restraining order against me. From blocking me in on the cul-de-sac, they got the restraining order. I was arrested, put in jail. When the police asked what were they doing at school that morning, especially the partner who had the restraining order, who took part in blocking me in, he realized that it was a setup and threw the case out.
Okay.
My son knew this had happened. It was a big deal. He was very upset about it, my son Brian, and he didn't want to go back to school the next day. He kept saying his stomach hurt, he didn't feel good, and I finally realized he was afraid to go to school because he was afraid what would happen next. Then it just more back and forth to the court, more fights all the time. And another time, his dad came to pick him up, and sitting in front of my house, the favorite trick was to block me in my driveway. The police came, and my son was screaming to his dad, "I hate you." It was a horrible, horrible scene, really heartbreaking because my son was hysterical crying, and I didn't know what to do. I could not tell my son not to go. It was his turn to go to see his dad. Then, again, another incident at his friend's house, and at that time his father came to pick him up, and his father called the police on him. So you could see now it's starting, not only was it escalating against me, but now the attacks were going against my son. And then it got to the point my son just refused to go over there. He did not want to go to his dad's house. At that point, of course, the courts got more involved. I got a guardian ad litem, thinking that the guardian ad litem could speak for my son, because they wouldn't let my son talk, and he was 11 by that time, and he kept asking to speak with the judge. But no, they wouldn't let him talk. And I have to warn everyone, don't get a guardian ad litem. You think they're going to help you and speak for the children, but 9 times out of 10, they do not. And also went for the psychological evaluation, thinking, okay, they kept accusing me of being crazy, which is normal what they do. And I said we both had to take the test. Interesting that my test results were printed and my ex's test results disappeared to this day. And I never was able to get my test results, even though I had to pay $2,500. And these are the tricks many moms have experienced in the court, or new moms going into the court think that they could turn to psychologists and guardians. But if they have to do with the court, they are usually their worst enemies. And so my attorney sent a notice that he was going away for a 1-week vacation, and I said, you can't leave me. I know they will plan something. My ex is very wealthy, and he had a very top-notch lawyer, and many times there were 2 lawyers against one. And sure enough, the week my attorney was out of town, they concocted, along his attorneys with the guardian ad litem and the psychologist, they concocted this whole bait and switch. My ex had taken my son and out of the state and hadn't returned him to me. And when I complained about it, they called me into court literally on a Friday morning and told me I had to be there in an hour and a half. My attorney was out of town. A real estate attorney filled in for him. She knew nothing about the case. We got to the court. Yeah, if you can believe that. We got to the court in an hour. I got the call at 9:30. The hearing was at 11. Meanwhile, my son and I had plans that the court knew about, that his father knew, that everyone knew because we had filed them, that we were going on a 10-day vacation to Canada with friends of ours and their son. Now, this is Friday, just 2 days before we're ready to leave on our vacation. And the real estate attorney says to the judge, can't this be postponed? Her attorney will be back next week. No, this is an emergency. The guardian, my ex's attorney, Gordon Bridger, and the psychologist literally gang up on me and start telling the judge that I am paranoid, I'm delusional, and I'm committing parent alienation. Mm-hmm. And they don't know where my son is. They're telling the judge they don't know where my son is. My son's missing. Now here I'm sitting in the courtroom, and nobody turns to me and says, where's Brian? It's like I'm not even in the courtroom. Because Brian is home with his older sister. And he's 11 and his sister's 18. And they're having this conversation, and I keep saying, can I please talk? Can I please talk? No, you can't talk. You don't have an attorney. So they call me in for a case in which I'm not allowed to testify or talk or even tell them where my son is, who happens to be home, which they all know. And this is how. So they then lock me in the courtroom, and they decide in that moment that I am to lose custody for the summer. I can no longer have any contact with my son. I can only talk to him on the phone if his father's listening. And that's it. I can't see him at all. And I'm in a state of shock. And they hand me the phone, and they tell me, call your daughter. They will not even allow me to say goodbye to my son. They won't even allow me to explain to him what has happened. And they literally keep me like a prisoner, locked in this courtroom. I have to call my daughter. My daughter is extremely upset. And she tells me later that my son was extremely upset. You have to get him ready for his dad to pick him up. And his father leaves the court, and they keep me there until they know his father picked him up. And then they tell me, you can see him when the summer's over. It'll go back. We had 50-50, even though I had a lion's share of the time. And I was a stay-at-home mom for all these years. For 11 straight years, I'd been a stay-at-home mom. So you can imagine I did have the bulk of time with my son. Class mom, everything involved in all the stuff that had to do with the children. Now they're telling me I'm a detriment to my child. I'm committing parent alienation, which I never even heard of the term, and I'm sent home. And they're telling me that, I'm just paranoid, delusional, crazy. And the next Tuesday, of course, we don't get to go on our vacation. The whole thing is canceled. And the next Tuesday, I did get my psychiatrist to come in who knew me, and he said, that's not true, what they're accusing me of. And if the court had thought I was in such terrible mental shape as to be a danger to my son, then they were required to Baker Act me, which is what they temporarily put you away for 72 hours or so. And, of course, they didn't because it was just totally made up. The summer goes by. I have my attorney. She now starts filing motions to me to get my son back. School starts, and the court keeps saying that they have lost the motion. She files a motion. She calls to find out when they set the date, and they'll say to her, we never got the motion. This happens 3 separate times. And she has to finally go to the chief judge. Meanwhile, she said, the court order is over for the summer. You can go to school and see your son, maybe have lunch with him. And I do. And my son asked me, Mom. Meanwhile, he sends me a few, at that time we had instant messaging. He kept sending me messages. Please, when can I come home? When can I come home? I miss you so much. And I go to the school, and he asks me again. This is another Friday. We're now in September. And I say, let me call your dad and see if he'll let you come home with me this weekend. And he goes back to class, and as I am walking out of the school, calling his father, I don't realize that his father's had his home phone forwarded to a cell phone, because back then, this is back in 2001, things were a little different technically. And I practically walk into him. He practically drives me over with his truck. He's actually at the school. He's followed me to the school. And he tells me, I'm calling the police right now. And he starts cursing and saying that he's going to say, I tried to steal Brian. Meanwhile, I'm leaving the school by myself, and Brian has gone back to his class. And he tries to trap me as I leave the school with his car. Luckily, some people came, and I was able to drive onto the grass and get away from him. But he goes to the court that afternoon. The family court judge, Judge Eade, and he asks for a restraining order. And he gets it immediately, even though normally in Broward County you have to go to the domestic violence court. But we know what this is like. And now I have 2 restraining orders against me, one from his partner and one from him. And I can't get one. I've tried 3 times, and I can't get one. And I've never gone to his house. Not the whole entire time did I ever go to his house. Oh, I went one time, but they didn't answer the door to pick up my son because I was afraid to go to his home. So all the exchanges either happened at school or happened at my home. Another 2 weeks pass by, and my attorney calls me to our office. We finally get a hearing. We get a hearing for his, domestic violence restraining order, but we can't get a hearing for me to see Brian. Now the judge tells my attorney, you should be happy that Mr. Silver did this, because now you'll get a hearing. But first hearing will be the restraining order. So the restraining order is going to come before our hearings, which is to get me to see Brian again. They kept changing the dates. We went to the higher court to stop the judge. We could see that they were all in collusion. It was they were planning on doing something. My attorney got the appeals lawyer, and the day before, literally at the 12th hour, the judge calls my attorney and says, we changed the hearing to 8 o'clock in the morning. Now, most of the hearings don't start till 9 or 10 o'clock.
Right.
8 o'clock in the morning. Imagine, 8 o'clock in the morning they're having this hearing. Why? Because the 4th District Court of Appeals was going to give us the answer before 11. And originally, our hearing was scheduled for 11. So the judge knew that the higher court could stop him from doing what he was doing. So he just went around it and scheduled it before they opened up in the morning.
Wow.
And my attorney called me in, and we had to go out into the hall because now she was worried that perhaps her office was bugged, perhaps there was someone she couldn't trust. Said, whatever you do, don't come to court tomorrow. They're planning to do something bad to you. I mean, imagine your attorney telling you that.
I know.
Besides which, my ex had exposed me to AIDS to 2 years without my knowledge, so I knew he didn't think much of, contaminating me, of hurting my life. Mm-hmm. He had done many, many, many abuses since the divorce, too many to go on with in this conversation. And my son was now fighting with him not to go over there. And at that time, it must have been about 6 o'clock, I left the office. Maybe it was 4 because I got to the bank and I decided we had to leave. Because if I was in danger, that meant my son was in danger. It's the only way I could see it. He was already fighting with his father, already having his father call the police on him. So what else was I to think as a mother? And I got up the next morning while they were all going to court, and I went to my son's school and picked him up, and we left the country.
Mhm.
We left the country for 9 months. We had heard that multiple people, bounty hunters were after us. Of course, the FBI was after us. You name it, they were after us. Special private eyes, and somebody had warned me. They said you're on the FBI list, and so I went to a computer, never using my own computer, of course. I'm sure I pull up a page, and there I am, because it's right after 9/11, on the 10 most wanted list with Osama bin Laden. If you can believe that, for a minute. Me, on my birthday week, yes.
Wow.
Me and 9 other Muslim men surrounding me.
Wow, bizarre.
Bizarre. So then I thought, well, the person who contacted me knew where I was. I better move, pick up, and we change where we're living, and we go to another place. And then I have another connection, and I find out that me and my son write the judge a letter, and my son still wants to testify to the judge. And I pretty much asked the judge, just listen, he's 12 years old. Please let us talk to each other. And there's a new judge now, and the new judge, my understanding, gets everyone together, my mother, my attorney, his father, his attorneys, and they write up an order saying that I can come back, I won't be arrested, and that they'll try and work this all through. Now, I have to tell you, I did not want to keep my son totally from his dad because it's still his father, and I always felt that my son should have a relationship with his dad. I have an older daughter who has a relationship with her father, and so I wanted to do whatever I could to right this wrong, and believing the new judge would perhaps give us a chance, I decide, even though my son Brian says to me, Mom, don't believe them, out of the mouth of babes. He knew more than I knew. Don't go back, don't go back. I said, well, no, we need to go back now. We go back, and I'm arrested immediately and put in jail, and he's whisked away and given right back to his father. Even though the order says he will be given to his grandparents, my parents, and he will have a chance to have his say and speak in court and tell his side of the story. Well, you know that never happens. And for 3 years, they finally let me out of jail, and then they put me on house arrest. And now I'm on house arrest, and my ex hires a private investigation service, or it's the same one that was trying to find me, which they never did. And now they're staked out in front of my house 24/7, videoing us, and if we do go anywhere, they follow us. These men follow us. That's a whole nother story.
But you spent 3 years in jail.
No, at that point, I'd only spent 6 days in jail, and then they put me on house arrest and I ended up being on house arrest for 3 years.
Okay. And so at this point, Brian is taken to his father immediately, like you said. So let's bring Brian in and ask him what that was like to suddenly be ripped away from you. And, here he's been told that he's going to his grandparents, to your parents, and here he's suddenly with his dad. Brian, can you tell us what that was like for you?
Yeah, it's hard to kind of go into all that, to be honest. Like, it was so fast, how everything happened so quickly, and like my mother said, I had to fight with my father before I'd been taken away. I was definitely missing him while I was away. You know, I'd still like to have a relationship with my father at the time, but not as much as I had been, and not being able to see my mother. So being taken, you know, coming back and then immediately being put back into the hands of my father, and then really having no contact with my mother again, I kind of remember just being like, well, why can't I see my mother? Why can't I see my parents and my family on, you know, my mother's side? Like, I didn't see anybody really. You know, my dad kind of kept me locked away from that whole side and not even seeing my mother. It was upsetting, to be honest. Obviously.
I take it you asked your dad, what's the reason for that I'm not allowed to see my mom? What did he say to that?
Yeah, I asked him that many a times, both during the summer and, you know, after, obviously. And he just kept saying, oh, you know, it's the court order, and, like, this is what the courts want, and they said you can't see him, which obviously is total BS, because if he had been like, oh, my son wants to see his mother, I could have actually probably seen her. It was quite upsetting, obviously. And, you know, you lie, obviously, oh, she's crazy, you can't trust her, and that's why they're keeping you from her, and this, that, the other. It was just, unfortunately, a lot of this I've had to block out mentally just to cope. I do remember, obviously, you know, being upset about the whole thing. And
Did
it
you
was
believe?
always the same lie.
Did you believe your dad when he said your mom is crazy?
No, I didn't. You know, as my mom said, she was very active when I was younger with me, and, you know, involved with my school, and, you know, I lived with her most of the time initially. And, you know, I knew my mother. I knew how my mother was, and she was never crazy, never manipulative. You know, the real manipulative one was my father, who was very good at that. And, you know, part of the strategy during this entire time when I was with him and taken away, not only from starting in that summer of, 2000 or 2001, I forget, but all the way through high school, was really just try to keep me occupied. Always going on trips, so we're going to see your family, you know, your aunt, your uncle, whatever. We're all going on a big family vacation. You know, that was his strategy, was to try to divert my attention from what I really wanted to, or what I wanted, to something else.
From what I understand, some of the protective moms tell me that the fathers will keep the kids really busy constantly, right? That's kind of what you're saying, too. Like, they'll try and keep you tired by enrolling you in sports and making you exhausted all the time. Is that what happened to you, too?
Yeah, pretty much. You know, at some point, I can't remember the exact date, but when my mother was under house arrest, we ended up pretty much moving up to Maryland, be closer to some family members. And, you know, once I got up here, my dad had me enroll in wrestling, do a sport. I'd gained a lot of weight at that point. You know, I was very depressed and upset by the whole situation. So between, you know, trying to enroll me in sports and taking me on vacations constantly and going camping all the time, just activities to fill my days. But, you know, the entire time it was always the same thing. It would be in the back of my mind, why can't I see my family? Why can't I see my mother? And as my mom said, there was supervised calls, which obviously is never comfortable, or your calls are being recorded and sent back to the lawyers. I mean, I knew at one point when I was up here in Maryland, I went to a psychiatrist because, you know, I was acting out in certain ways and getting in some trouble, not a ton, but trouble in school and everything. And, you know, I guess they wanted my input still in the courts, which my mother can elaborate more on that subject. So my voice in the courts was another psychiatrist. But even then, I would talk to my mother via that method, but I knew all of our phone calls were recorded, so it was still kind of hollow on the surface, I guess.
So the calls were supervised?
Yes, she would leave the room and basically go into another room and record it. She had a recorder, you know, set up, and I I knew when I was talking to my mother, and I believe my mother knew as well, that all of our phone conversations were being recorded.
So did they also, because in my situation when I still had some Skype contact with my daughter Jasmine, which unfortunately ended in May of 2015, but before that time I had some Skype contact with my daughter, and a supervisor would sit next to her and basically tell us what we could and couldn't talk about. We could basically only talk about the weather or about her school. And if it was about anything else, the laptop would be closed. Was that in your case as well, that they really got into what you were both saying to each other?
No. So concurrently with this, and a little bit before the full, I'd say concurrently with the phone calls being recorded, I was able to go see my mother a couple times and supervise visits. And during those visits, there was, I guess he was an off-duty police officer, sitting pretty much right at the table with us. He'd say what we could and couldn't tell us to each other about. It was ridiculous. It was ridiculous because my mother's on house arrest, and here's this police officer sitting right at the table telling, me and her trying to have a conversation about just basic things, how's the family going. And, yeah.
So how did that affect you to see your mom in this controlled situation with a police officer there? What's that like as a child? I mean, how does that make you feel about the whole situation?
Not good. It felt like I was voiceless. I had no voice. As my mother said, this entire time, I'd always been asking the judge, I'd been asking my father, I'd been asking the guardian ad litem, been asking her to tell her lawyers so that I could get up there, and they never wanted it. They always wanted to go through a third party or have someone, how do I describe it, silence my voice or filter my voice. And I felt that, these supervised visits were basically the same thing. They're just filtering my voice. I couldn't be truthful and honest with my mother. I couldn't tell her how things were going beyond, how's school, it's going okay, I don't like it, or I do like it, whatever it may be. It kind of makes you have a hatred for the whole system and for authority figures as a result. I can tell you as much about the results of all of this. A lot easier because that's, who I am today, obviously. But it's upsetting. It's upsetting that despite all these calls of me talking with her, saying I miss her, and, even in person and with this police officer there, none of it mattered. None of it mattered to the judges or to the lawyers or to the guardian. Now the supervised visits stopped probably, I don't know if my mother could chime in on that, but they stopped because the Department of Child Protective Services had gotten involved at one point.
Okay, Miriam, can you maybe explain what happened here? Why did the supervised visitation stop? And what was this with CPS?
Yes. After we came back, the Department of Children and Families were already involved. They had already gotten involved in the case. And he'd come back, and he was placed with his dad, and I was on supervised visit. And the DCF, we call them DCF workers, spoke with him, spoke with his dad, spoke with me. His father was not allowed under law to leave the state of Florida until the DCF investigation was over. But, these people, especially if you have money and know the right lawyers and judges, they don't follow anybody. They don't follow any laws. They do whatever they want. They make it up as they go along. And they allowed him to leave the state and move to Maryland without the investigation being finished. The investigator, called me and said, they had been looking for Brian. Like, where did he go? The investigation was still open. He was supposed to have gone to see a special, like a psychologist. They wanted to see what he had to say. And they asked me when he was coming back, and I told them. Now, up to that point, I had seen, that would have been like my 8th or 9th hour. I'd seen Brian only 2 times before that, 3 hours each, and this was the 3rd time. And at that point, we actually didn't even have the supervised phone contact yet. It was just these few little visits. And the Department of Children did show up that day. They didn't, and they told his father that he couldn't leave, Brian couldn't leave until they finished the investigation. His father fought with them, of course, and told them to put my son in foster care.
What?
Yes. 2 hours outside in the driveway. The policeman, the supervisor, he ran away because he had used the Broward County police car, which isn't legal, so he left because he couldn't have the Boca police see him there in that police car. So he left. Brian was in the bathroom. The DCF worker was trying to get to Brian, and then he was fighting with Brian's dad because the supervisor called up his dad, and then the lawyer who was supposed to be the lawyer for Brian, interestingly enough, because the DCF worker said, look, obviously we know he can't stay with his mom right now. Let him stay with one of his relatives, his grandmother. He had several aunts there, cousins. Let me put him with one of his cousins or his grandmother and until the investigation's finished. And both Brian's supposed lawyer and his father said no, put him in foster care. And his name was Patrick. Yeah, Patrick fought and fought and fought and fought and fought not to do that to Brian. Because it didn't make sense to him to do that. He had all his family here. Why would he put this child who had so many relatives around in foster care? He actually drove. Finally, he had no choice. His father was threatening him, and he finally took Brian. Not that he wanted to. He took Brian to the office, and then that evening I got a call from Brian saying, Mom, can I please go to my aunt's? And I said, of course. They'd all been waiting for him. It took several hours because his father made the aunt and the uncle go through a whole background check, and he finally got to be with them for 3 days. And the court did see him in that time and us, and they said that they couldn't interfere because we're in a different county now. They couldn't interfere with the family court. He could still go to his dad. He just couldn't be around his dad's partner who was there. And nothing could be said about him. He could never be mentioned again. And the rest of it had to go back to family court. That they believed Brian. They actually believed, they were the only ones who did believe Brian in the government, believe it or not. But they weren't in a position to, they helped him as much as he can while they went to the family court. His father went to the family court and the lawyer, and they immediately went to appeals court. Appeals court stood up for Brian, stood up for me, kept that order in place. Father went back to the family court again, and the family court once again said, we don't need to pay attention to that order. You do whatever you want. And that was the end of that. So there was Brian in the same position again.
So he went to foster care then?
No, he did end up going to his aunt's for the 3 days.
Okay.
He didn't.
Okay.
He just went to the office of the DCF worker, who really put his job on the line, not to put Brian in foster care. He'd never had a father saying, "Put my son in foster care." He didn't even know what to make of that. He got the lawyers involved, and I don't know what went on in those conversations. I wasn't there. But finally, he drove Brian. I don't know if he drove Brian or his aunt came and picked him up, but he did finally ended up going and spending a couple of days with his aunt until they sorted that part out. But in the end, he ended up back with his dad, and I didn't get to see him at all during all that time.
And then you are switched to only phone calls. Yes.
No. Well, that took I think a year and a half or two to get that.
Yeah, it was a while.
So you guys didn't have any contact at that point for a year and a half?
No, none.
Wow.
Nothing.
All right, Brian, tell me what that was like.
Well, again, it was just another one of those, why can't I see my mother? Why can't I see my family? Why can't I go down to Florida? You know, like my mom said, I had a lot of family down there. I had cousins. I was always very close with them since we lived down there for so long. And the results were the same. Oh, we can't go back there. Or they'll try to put you in foster care again. You don't want that. You know, it was made into a boogeyman argument that I'd be taken away and, you know, you can't see your mother because of the courts. It was upsetting, obviously. Again, it was, and I don't know what's happening with my mother. I have no idea. Last time I saw her, I was hiding out in a tree from the police officers who were trying to get me to go with the CPS worker.
Oh, my God.
God. They threatened to call the fire department to come get me down if I didn't do it myself. So I eventually caved. But I was kind of with my mom for a long, long while. Really.
Did you try and contact her?
I had no means of contacting. I didn't know her phone number. I think I tried to write a few emails, but, you know, emails, letters, my dad filtered all of that. He would take my mail to my family. He wouldn't give it to me. Or he'd look through my emails. I think he put a block on my emails because I could never contact my mom, as far as I remember. I think he cut off all communication. I had no means of contacting anyone in my family. And, you know, I was young. Like I said, I didn't know if people felt like phone numbers at that point in time. I was too young.
Let me ask you, because, you know, my daughter is in this situation now where she has no contact with me at all. And I worry, you know, that she thinks that I left her there or something. You know what I mean? Like, did you feel that at all?
I don't feel that my mother left me there. I feel I was angry at her, you know, for letting it get to that point. I was angry at my father for letting it get to that point. I was angry at the courts for letting it get to that point. But, you know, you have to kind of cut through it. It took me a long time. At that age, I couldn't quite distinguish what was true and what was false. All I knew was I was being told one thing, but it didn't seem true. No matter what I was told, it just didn't seem true, both from my father and from my psychiatrist. I really had to question everything as a child.
Because that sounds so difficult to me, because, you know, I'm thinking about my daughter Jasmine, and I'm thinking she's probably thinking, like, why is my mom not contacting me, or how come she hasn't changed the situation yet? You know what I mean? Like, when you're a child, you probably think that, you know, the courts are, you know, that justice occurs in the courtroom, right? It's probably hard to how do you make sense of this as a child? You know something's wrong, but I would think you can't really figure out why justice isn't happening. Am I correct in going in that direction?
You are correct. Yeah, you know, like I said, I thought it was my father's fault. I thought it was my mother's fault. But more than them, I thought it was the court's fault. Like, my mom, you know, left. I saw my mom, and everything I told her prior to that was that I wanted to see her. And I figured, you know, her lawyer would do it. My lawyer would do it. My dad, if I told my dad that I wanted to see my mother, you know, his lawyer would relay that message over to the courts. But the truth, you know, I couldn't discern as a child that it was actually a lot of my father's doing. Just, nope, you can't see your mother. He'd tell me, yes, okay, I'll try to get that, relay that message to the judge, and blah, blah, blah. And have my lawyers tell him, but that never ended up happening, obviously. You know, it would smile on your face, stab you in the back kind of situation. And
did your father ever say, like, well, your mom's not interested in contacting you?
No, I believe he had said that the court had basically blocked a lot of the communication. It was court ordered or whatever. I don't believe that for a second. But, and then like my mom said, like once that year had passed and finally I've been able to speak with my mother again, it was nice. It was very enlightening being able to actually communicate with her. And I kind of got a little bit of sense of what was going on. She was still kind of fighting the good fight, but she had her own battle with the whole kidnapping and abduction going on as well. At that point, I kind of realized a little bit more. I'd gotten older. I was probably like 13 at the time. I kind of realized more and more that it was my father's will that was keeping me from seeing my mother.
Mhm. So how did that play out in your relationship with your father?
It really led me to not trust him and really not trust anybody as a result. Even to this day, I still have trust issues. I don't trust anyone, what they say. It's not necessarily a terrible thing, but it's also, it's a general life lesson, but it's also terrible to not be able to trust your own father. One of your parents. It's a hard thing. And, it even led to me not trusting my mother a bit because, you keep ask your dad to see your mom. Oh, she's crazy. The courts won't let you see her. She's a danger, blah, blah, blah. As much as you tell yourself that's not true, it starts nagging at you, and it gets in a little bit, but, you have to hold true to the notion that maybe this is a lie. I can't believe this. It's not what I remember it being like. A year and a half, your memory starts to fade of what's happened in the past, and was my mother that loving? I don't know. But I always held on that it was a lie and that my mother loved me and she was doing everything that she could for me, and that my father was basically lying to me. I started to stop believing anything he said, and even to this day I still have to question. If it comes to anything related to courts or my mother, I basically just tell him flat out, don't talk to me about this, or I can't trust you on this at all.
Mhm. So, but it must have been really hard to you're living with him and you're not trusting him, and so I mean, how does that play out then when you're like, you're coming home from school and you're having dinner, and what's that contact then? I mean, if you don't trust your father and he's lying and he's blocking all of this, how can you have what type of relationship do you have then with your father at that point?
I'm not sure. I'm sure some of your listeners can relate. It's like when you have a friend that they always embellish the truth on every story they tell, and you just kind of like, roll your eyes, okay. They're still your friend, but you never really, it's like, how can I take this? A lot of our conversations, at least nowadays, are more geared towards politics and something that's a neutral situation or subject for us to discuss. But at the time, again, it was a good deal of misdirection to keep me, keep me from pushing him for more contact or questioning him constantly. Why can't I see my mother? I would question it, but at the same time, you have to do good in school, you have to do good at sports. We're going on vacation here, so. He was very good at manipulating me in that regard, and I was aware of it. But just because you're aware of it doesn't mean that you can avoid that trap.
Mm-hmm.
So
you're just kind of in a waiting mode, I would think. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was a waiting mode for a long while. I guess we had contact. For the 1 year and a half that we didn't have contact, it was, the waiting mode, trying to get back to talk to my mother. not trusting my father and why I can't talk to my mother this entire time. Now, after I regained contact, the situation kind of changed, obviously. But I think, oh, we finally got you the ability to go and talk to your mother, and here's how we're going to do it. So, obviously it changed in the story.
So at some point you both had contact again via the phone, and that's changed your feelings and thoughts about what was going on, I would think.
Yeah, it cleared up. I believe during those calls, my mom did tell me that she'd sent me letters and asked me, had you gotten... My dad was filtering letters from my friends who were inviting me to birthday parties. That's how bad it had become.
Wow.
Yeah, I missed Sweet 16s, and I guess that was a little bit later on, but that's how long he really filtered my letters. He filtered my letters for years. Even gifts from family, all of that. He took birthday presents, gift cards, whatever it may be, he just put that aside. I never saw anything. My mom was like, oh, did you ever get this letter from, your aunt or from your grandma? Because, I was obviously curious where they were as well. Where were they in this whole situation?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, no, I haven't seen anything. So, obviously, the distrust grew in that regard, and I kind of started aligning myself more with my mother in the regards of realizing that she was trying to help me from her end during that time, but that I had no idea.
So let's fast forward a little bit. At what age did you both reunite? Because you were separated for 8 years. Did you age out of the system? Is that how you both ended up reuniting again, or was there another event that led up to the reunion of you both?
Well, there was another event. I can't remember how long we had phone contact. It wasn't for very long, maybe a couple more years or a year. And then after that, my mom could probably speak on this better than I can. She had to go to trial for the kidnapping, basically, for taking me. Mm-hmm. And then I lost contact with her for many years. That was really the last time I saw her for another, I think, 4 years, maybe longer.
Oh my God!
Yeah, it was at a court case in a courtroom. That was the last time I saw her, was when I was on the witness stand. And that was that. Then I didn't see her for many years, and I heard a little bit. I think it was from her, from my family down there. And then I kind of just lost all connection. And then, by that point, I was probably 14 or so, 15. I'm not entirely sure on the dates. But I kind of just drowned out the world and partying and friends and, trying to forget the trauma that I endured and the trauma that I was living in a way.
Mm-hmm. And so, Miriam, tell me what was what led up to the reunion? Was it because Brian aged out of the system, or?
No. After the trial, I got to see him 2 times right before the trial, total of 6 hours, which went well. The family court finally said, "You've done everything. Brian can come stay with you in the summer." I was thrilled. But you have to go through your trial first. Went through my trial, was found guilty, never denied taking my son, but the trial judge, Charles Green, never allowed in any of my evidence, so I never really had a 2-week trial with them never hearing why I took my son. It's another farce. And then the judge said, I said, but can I see him? I had to go to jail for 9 months, a year, but I'd already served 3 months because they had done other things to me in the process to get me to take a plea. So then I had 6 more months left that they put me in jail. Originally, they were going to put me in prison for 2.5 years, but the judge made a special plea because he didn't want me to appeal the case. He understood that what he was doing was wrong, and they basically not only twisted my arm, my lawyers, my friends and families getting me to take plea because that was already over, but a special deal. So I did these 6 months in jail, and I said, what about seeing my son when I get out? The family court okayed it. I can finally see my son again. Well, now his father went to the Judge Green, the criminal judge, and the criminal judge said his lawyer, Deborah Carpenter, will tell Brian that he can call you when he wants to see you. So his father's lawyer is supposed to tell Brian that now he can see me. All he has to do is pick up the phone and call me, and we can see each other. But I can't. I can't do anything. And so I was like, how's that going to work? Like, I didn't trust the lawyer any more than I trusted his dad at that point. And so the years went on. Yes, tried to send a Christmas card or a birthday card. Ended up going to court for that. Almost got put in jail for that. Just, happy birthday, thinking of you, love you. Nope. And so I couldn't, Brian did finally, turn 18, but you have to remember his dad had a never-ending restraining order against me. And my fear, and I was waiting for Brian to call me because that was the only way that the court was saying he could do it. I don't know if Brian even knew that he could then contact me and see me again. How could I know that? Nobody would tell me. And so I was afraid. I knew his dad always watched me. I knew he always had private eyes watching me. And my fear was that if I tried to find Brian at college, that his father would arrive that same weekend and, of course, call the police and say I broke the restraining order and have me thrown in jail again. And I honestly couldn't go to jail again. And but we had one last hearing. It was 2009. I'd served my time. I did everything, went back on house arrest, the whole 9 yards. And my attorney was asking for early release. His father showed up and fought for me not to have early release. And the judge, a new judge, took a new judge, and the judge said, I see what went on here. He actually said there was never any violence in this case from the mother, and this shouldn't have happened, and he took it all away. And then he had to drop the restraining order. Now, by that time, Brian was 21. Within 3 months of that restraining order being dropped, and I only waited because it was summer, I waited for Brian to go back to school. I knew where he was going to school. And I flew up there, all very secretive, still being afraid that somehow I would be set up and be arrested, because that's what happens to us moms. After you've been arrested 4 times and going to jail 4 times, you get a little nervous about the system. So
I bet.
Yeah. So I just showed up at his, not at his school, but at a hotel close to his school. I had a friend use her number, again, afraid of even using my own phone number. And she said, hi, Brian, this is Susan. Someone's here to speak to you. And she handed me the phone, and he said, hi, Mom. It was like Brian had been waiting for that call. And he came right away, met me at the hotel, and that was that. Rest is history.
Wow. What was that like, Brian?
It was surreal. I guess that would be the only way. I kind of confided in a friend in college about the whole ordeal of how I had been denied seeing my mother. And, he kind of prompted me to try to get in contact with her again. And, I was nervous. I didn't know if my mother was mad at me at that point for kind of putting it off. And then, when I got that call. We talked a minute, and then I told my friend, he's like, you should just do it. Because I had no idea what it was going to be like. If mom was going to be mad at me, what I was going to even say. But once I saw her, it was fulfilling, I guess. You know, very happy, but also angry. It was a mix of both feelings.
And angry about the whole situation because you realized what had happened and you were finally able to actually really talk to her?
I was angry at her. I was angry at the whole situation. I was wondering why she never contacted me sooner. I mean, like my mom said, I had no idea that I could have just called her up. I was angry at myself, never just giving her a call when I turned 18 to go see her. Somewhere around then, I had just kind of given up on the notion that I'd ever see that side of the family again and that I was starting a new life. I don't know why I came to that conclusion as a child, but, you know, I guess. So.
Let's take a little musical break. We're at the 1 hour point, and I also see a caller that's been on hold for quite a while. And just so you know, caller, I do see you on my dashboard. I want to take a musical break and then come back and let that caller on, see what he or she has to add or ask, and then we'll go on with our second hour of the show. So I'll see you on the other side. And welcome back to Hell is for Children. We're in the second hour of the show, and during the first hour, we've been talking to Miriam Silver and her son Brian, who were forcefully separated for 8 years. And it's been just an incredible story that is making me very emotional because, you know, I'm in this situation too. I don't have any contact with my daughter. I haven't had any contact with her for a year, so it's been really helpful for me to listen to Brian specifically explain what it was like for him to go through that. And we'll talk more with him and with his mom about what happens once they got reunited and what that was like. But I have a caller on hold, and she or he has been on hold for quite a while, so I want to put this caller on. And hello, you're on the air. Who's this? Hello, you're live on the air. Area code 561. Not hearing anything, so I'm going to mute that person again. Maybe they're just listening. That could very well be. Okay, wait. Hold. They're calling in again. Hello, can you hear me? Hello. You called in. Yes, hi. Who am I talking to?
Hello?
Yes, can you hear me?
Oh, okay, thank you. Yes, this is Mary Morris. How are you?
Hi. I'm good. How are you?
I'm just sending my best wishes and a big hug to Brian and Karen. I journeyed with them a little bit on their tail end of this horrible thing, and I'm just glad. It's wonderful to know that they're reunited and in contact with one another.
So you were kind of throughout this whole process connecting to the mom and knowing what the situation was?
Once when she was home from Costa Rica, yeah. But I met her in 2005 or 6. So, but I'm proud of both of them. And boy, Karen just put up a fight. That woman was not giving up, no matter what. I mean, she went to jail 4 times. That's amazing. So she has my respect. And Brian, you're a good kid, and I bet this has been healing for you also.
Well, thank you for calling in, but thank you also for being so supportive to Brian's mom, because that is what we need. You know, we need people to help us and be supportive so we can, you know, keep standing throughout the storm.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, you can't get through it without your support system. Well, thank you, and I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the program.
Thank you so much for calling in. All right, let's go back to Brian. Brian, I got you back on. We left off where you were telling me that you had, these feelings of anger, you were angry at your mom, at your dad, at the court system, and also at yourself. What ended up, how did you work through that?
Time and forgiveness, I guess, was kind of how I worked through it. As I was explaining before the break, the first time I saw my mom again, it was a little surreal, and I believe I yelled at her for quite a bit. Just wondering what happened to her, why she never came, why she never contacted me. And as I said, I wasn't so angry at her as I was at myself, just for never reaching out. I'd missed a lot of time, and time is more valuable than anything we have in this life. The only thing that can't be replaced. I missed my sister's wedding, and not seeing your mother for so long. I had a picture of what she looked like, but then I saw her, and she's much older than she was last I saw her. Of course, I was older as well.
But I take it that she explained to you her side of the story. Did that help you in getting a better understanding of what had happened?
Yes, it did. And, she kind of cleared up what had happened in that whole interim period where we hadn't been in contact with each other for several years. And that did help. It took me a while after that, honestly, to forgive her fully and to forgive my father and forgive myself. I still hold my father accountable for quite a lot of this. However, living with hatred, it'll beat you down. It'll make you a better person. At some point, you have to let that go. I've seen what people are like. My grandmother is a perfect instance of what living with hatred is. She hates everyone. But, and I don't want to end up like that. And, it probably took, I want to say, after I saw my mother that weekend, it probably took, honestly, about a year or two more before I'd fully forgiven her and kind of patched our relationship up. And then, now, 5 years on, I have a perfectly normal relationship. I'm pretty much everything is back to normal. Still reconnecting with my sister a bit. But, it takes time. It takes time to forgive. And you have to really just kind of put it behind you that what's happened has happened. And that you have to move forward and grow as a person. Otherwise, you'll just be sitting there wondering, constantly questioning, well, what if I had done this? And what if I had done that? And, what if I had ran away from home? And you can't concern yourself. You'll obsess over it. So
the part that's still difficult for me is when I'm listening to you, because you're angry at your mom, but once you heard how hard your mom was fighting for you, and how these corrupt judges and attorneys and guardian ad litems totally blocked her access to you, at that point, didn't the anger go away, or what was the anger about exactly? I mean. Yeah,
I wish I could say it was just diminished right then and there. It's honestly, it just, as I said before, my father was very good at manipulating, and as much as I always told myself whatever he was saying was a lie, and I can't believe it, part of that still kind of seeps in, and you really have to try hard to push that aside, push those notions that, oh, your mom is crazy and, she won't do the best for you. And it took a while to fight past that because, I hadn't seen my mother in years at that point. It had just been my father. And at some point, it's almost, I don't want to say Stockholm Syndrome, but it kind of almost is a Stockholm Syndrome. You know, you side with your captor. So it took some time to really kind of see through the darkness to find the light. And, you know, speaking as a child, I know it's hard for a parent to hear that your children may be angry at you, but if you're a parent, like, you know, my mother, I applaud her efforts, and she didn't stop. She let me be angry at her. And it was sad. I was sad also. You know, like I said, I think the anger wasn't so much towards her or at her, but it was anger at myself and my lack of efforts. And I guess I just projected that onto her, a lot of it. But, you know, it's not like I hated her. Like, I loved her. It's just I was angry at her. It sounds like it was just a lot of venting of the frustration about the whole situation that kind of kind of came out at that point. Would that be a good way to look at it? Yes. That would be a perfect way to phrase that. And, you know, that's really what it was. Like I said, I think it took a couple more times of us seeing each other before I was fully released of most of my anger at her. But it still took a while longer to catch up the relationship. Yeah, it takes time for the soul to heal, I bet, at that age particularly. What happened with your the relationship with your father once you figured out what actually really happened? I started lashing out at him after that. You know, angry at him, asking him why it ended this way. Why did he do this? You know, he kept saying the same thing. He'd playing the same horn. He'd been playing the whole time. Oh, it was the chorus. It was this. It wasn't me. And, you know, I told him how I felt, that I couldn't trust him. I couldn't trust anything he said to me in regards to this, in regards to my mother, in regards to the divorce. And, you know, that's still a point of contempt between us. As I said, at this point, I've had to put a lot of that, I don't have to, but I have put a lot of that behind me. And accepted that he's my father. What he did is, you know, I can never forgive him for that. But he is still my father, and I still love him nonetheless. But it's, you know, it was hard. It was very hard, and it did put a big strain on our relationship for a few years after that. You know, with me wanting to move away and just get out of there and just go live with my mother. But, you know, I was in college at the time. So it took a while. You know, what could I do? He was paying for college for me. I couldn't be too feisty in my actions. I guess I could have been, but I think it would have been a poor choice overall. And with that said, he has all the records. I know my mom has a lot of the records too, and at some point here I need to go through them, because I think that's the only true way I'll have an understanding of what happened and what he was lying about, why, you know, what were the reasons of it. But we're talking 8 years and tens of thousands of pages. I spoke to another survivor, and she's now an adult woman, and she told me that the most healing thing for her was to read all the court records, because then she realized how her father had framed her mother through the courts. And once she saw that, she realized what had happened. She chose to then break off the communication with the father, because she realized she had been lied to, and you know, and her mom had been framed, and that was her choice. You know, you might end up making other choices, but she did let me know that was healing for her, to actually read how
the entire hostage situation had been constructed. So that might be, something for you to look into. Not that I'm saying you shouldn't have contact with your father at all. I'm not saying that at all. What I strive for everyone is to have healing. What I really hope for is that these fathers come to their senses. If you were able to, I understand the contact with your father now is strained in the sense that you don't discuss this, so you keep it off. You don't mention that topic. What would your message be to all the fathers right now who are keeping their children hostage?
I would tell them, let their children see their mothers. It's not fair. They're doing it because they're vindictive towards their ex-wives or girlfriends or ex-girlfriends or whomever it may be. But, they're trying to hurt them, but they're really just hurting their children. And they're hurting their relationship with their children. Their children aren't going to trust anybody. Their children are going to, turn to drugs potentially later in life. They're only hurting their children as a result, and it's their vendetta. It's not fair to use their children as a weapon.
Mm-hmm. What would your advice be to the children who are still in this situation?
I would tell those children to, obviously stay strong and question everything. You really have to. Don't believe everything your parent says. If your father keeping you hostage, don't believe what they're telling you about their mother. They'll try to poison your mind. They'll try to poison your thoughts. You tell a lie enough, and you may end up believing it. No matter how strong you stay, it still might creep in there in the back of your mind, but you have to remember, you're just being told these things. And unless you have the facts in front of you, you can't trust it. You can't believe it. And with that, I would also say, you don't just have to directly confront your father about this. Just always keep in the back of your mind that this might not be true, and this is probably not true, and I can't trust this. You're just trying to turn me against my mother. So that's really my advice to children, is just question everything and really take anything your parents say with your father says with a grain of salt. Like, if you have to, you can't believe that.
And would you also suggest that they try to find their mothers?
I'm sorry, you're breaking up a bit.
Okay. Well, just keep on talking. My question, I don't know if you hear me, but my question was, would you suggest to children to try and find their mothers and contact them?
Yes, I would. That was one of the things I was angriest at myself for not doing, especially when I turned 18 and that day, not picking up the phone and trying to call my mother. If you're a kid, even if you're not 18, try to do it. Let your mothers know what's going on. They have no idea if you're alive, if you're dead. Just give them some sort of hope to keep going and know that they are doing, fighting for a good cause and fighting for you, and that, give them that extra strength they need to hold on there. And again, don't let it get to the point that I did where you wait years and you regret that and you're angry at yourself for that. So I really do encourage them to reach out towards their mothers and try to get in contact with them in any way possible.
What if you had a chance to talk to the judge who made this order for you to be with your dad like this and not have any contact with your mom? What would you say to that judge?
I would tell them that they are a whore for money. As a judge, they're supposed to uphold the law and serve justice, and they didn't. They did it to line their own pockets, keep the system going, hire guardian ad litems and psychiatrists and pay all these people, and God knows what they get kickbacks in any other way. They're just, you went into the service, into that job, to be a just cause and to again, create justice for society and uphold that justice. And by turning your back on that, they're just terrible people. I would never forgive them, and I don't want to be vindictive, but I'd wish they'd have to go through the same experience so that they knew what it was like. And then maybe then they would realize, how terrible their actions really are.
Yep. Clear. Yeah. So, so going towards the future, I'm taking that a lot of the contact between your mom and you has now changed. You've worked through the anger, it sounds like, and I really applaud you on being able to not stay in a place of bitterness, because the anger can turn into bitterness, and that's just such a negative, toxic type of feeling to have. How do you live with this now? I mean, did you seek any form of therapy around this to work through these feelings, or are there any type of tips you have for children, for survivors like yourself?
We didn't do any sort of therapy or anything like that. We just started talking, obviously, again, after the initial period of anger and outbursts, and we just kind of started getting back to what was normal. She explained the whole situation to me. Again, that did help me, give up some of the hatred and anger directed at her and as well at me. You're a kid, you should never feel like you're responsible for any of this. But, nowadays I talk to my mom twice, 3 times a week. See her pretty often. I come visit her. She comes visit me. As for tips on it, it's a hard call. It's really, I think, be open. Be open to what they're saying to you as a child. Be truthful with them. Chances are, like me, you'll have to have lived under a false face for a while while you're with your father. And that it's okay to be honest. They are both as a mother should be open towards the criticism directed at her and understand that some of that's not at her entirely, and that it is really just a lashing out of the child. And as a child, realize that, they're your mother, and they'll always be there for you, and they always love you. It doesn't matter if you're angry at her now. She should be there to take some of that anger from you and help you understand it yourself. Now, if you need to go to a psychiatrist, go for it. I was burned one too many times, and I don't trust psychiatrists for the most part, or psychologists. I don't trust either of them. So I can't kind of recommend that personally. Mm-hmm. But just try to go back to normalcy and talk about old stories and activities that you did as a kid, and just like you're reconnecting with an old friend. It's just, you got to find common ground and move forward from there, and you'll be able to open up more and more. And you'll realize that, as a child, you'll realize that, your mother hasn't changed, hopefully, and that, she's still the same woman that you remember, really. So
the tips that you have for the moms who are, maybe about to reunite with their children would be to be understanding of the anger that is going to be dropped on their plates, and to be empathic in that sense and compassionate in allowing the child to release those feelings. Would that be a fair way to put it?
Yeah, and don't shy away from it. Don't think that they're angry at you and that they won't forgive you for what's happened. It wasn't my mother's fault for being totally screwed over by the court system. Your child will come to that realization in time. It may take them a little while, but don't be scared to stand strong and be that lightning rod for a moment. As I said, my mom would probably agree with me on this, obviously, because here we are today, still connected or reconnected. Be strong for children.
Right. I agree, and this is one of the messages that I also have for all the other moms, and I've said this in prior radio shows. It's really important, if you are a protective mom and you're listening now, to realize that it's really important to stay strong no matter what. So when you do get reunited with your children, you are that strong woman, and you can, work through the aftermath of it. I actually saw the aftermath with another protective mom friend who's very close to me, who was reunited with her children, and I saw how traumatic the first year or so was, the emotions that were just flying around, and it was very intense. It really aged the mom, and it did with the children too. I think it would be, and this would be a question for you, Brian, like, do you feel like when you compare your own childhood with the childhood of friends who haven't gone through this, do you feel like it has made you mature faster than your peers?
Absolutely. I always said I was 20 years old at 12, and by 20 I was 35. You're not blinded by the whimsical, life is great, everything's perfect. You don't experience that. You see through the BS real quick, and you see how terrible life can be, and how not everything is rosy. So I think you really do grow up very fast when you go through the situation of being forcibly taken away from your parent. And it's unfair. It's unfair that I feel like I was robbed of my childhood in some ways. I never grew up in a perfect family home and, everything's great and we're going on family vacation. It's like, nope, I know what's happening. I know where we're going on this vacation. Yeah, it was a great vacation, but, I understand that, again, I was trying to keep my mind occupied and keep me busy. So, yes, you grow up fast.
So when you grow up knowing that you're being manipulated, I would think that as an adult now that you have a sixth sense for anyone that you meet who is trying to manipulate you. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I have a pretty good sense for that. I also have a pretty good sense of, or not even sense, but just, if I see that from somebody who I meet, I try to distance myself from that almost entirely, like immediately. I just try to get away from anyone who pushes BS towards you. Oh, well, this is what happened here and there. I went on this crazy adventure. It's like, that didn't happen. I know that didn't happen. You're a snake oil salesman trying to sell me something or manipulate me somewhere down the line. So I distance myself from anybody with that sort of,
you have a sixth sense for anyone who's trying to anyone who's not honest, basically.
Yeah.
But that would be a good thing, right? If you take that away.
It is a good thing.
Right.
One of the downsides is, you really, at least from my point of view and my experience has been, you don't trust anybody who's an authority. You can never trust them. I felt completely betrayed by the judges, by the psychiatrists, by the police, by pretty much everyone. I never trust them, never believe that they would ever protect me or do anything to help me. So it's kind of a downside, and you feel that you always have to fend for yourself no matter what situation you may be in.
Do you feel also that it affects trust relationships in when you have intimate relationships with others? Does it affect that as well?
Yes. I have both intimate and non-intimate relationship. It definitely affects the trust on both ends. I have a best friend and where I live now, and he knows nothing of any of this story. I wouldn't even dare dream of telling him about it. Maybe one day when we're older, over a beer or something, I will. But, girlfriends, everything like that, never quite open up fully. You always feel like you have to hold back parts of the truth of who you are and how you arrived at who you are. It kind of makes you a little bit more of a listener, I think, than it does a speaker. You know, in conversation, you like to listen a little bit more because you don't want to give up too much information about yourself because you don't know if there's some person is going to use that information against you, or, you know, you're always kind of looking behind your shoulder, looking over your shoulder to see if someone's coming up behind you, not physically, but metaphorically speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So it definitely has a effect on your trustiness or trust. Yeah.
Well, what I wish for you is that you will find people in your life that you can trust for 110%. That you can finally really show who you are and what happened to you, and feel like that will never be used against you in any shape or form. So you can find that inner freedom. You know what I mean?
Yes, no, thank you for that. I hope so too. As time has gone on, it has become a little bit easier, at least in romantic relationships, to trust, but still not 100%. So hopefully someday soon here.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's bring your mom back in. Miriam, can you hear me? I see Miriam on, but I'm not sure if she can hear me. I see a question mark behind her telephone number. Miriam, why don't you call back in again? Hang up and call in again, and then hopefully that will resolve the issue. Let me see. There's another caller on as well. Oh no, I think that's that's her friend. So we'll wait until she comes back on again. Miriam, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, there was something going on with your connection, but I'm glad to have you back on. So we've heard Brian's story about how he's been processing all of this. What have you done in terms of, describe to us what it's been like for you to be reunited with him, and then, because I know you wrote a book, and I mentioned the book in the introduction. It's called Protecting My Child, How a Mother Tries to Protect Her Son and is Placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. Did you start writing that book after you were reunited with Brian?
No. Funny thing is that writing that book finally gave me the courage to just go up to his college and find him. I mean, I'd made up my mind if I had to sit in front of the engineering school for a week to find him, I would do that. But I did not want to publish the book until I had told my son about it and made sure he was okay with it. I just didn't want to do anything to jeopardize our relationship. So I felt like I needed him to know about it before it went to the publishing stage.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to assume that writing the book helped you process what happened to you.
It's a funny thing. A lot of people have said comments like that, or they said, oh, it must have been very cathartic, but no. I was encouraged by a lawyer friend who kept saying, you have to write this story. And finally, I just sat myself down almost, I guess, a year and a half before Brian and I reunited. And it took me a month. And that's all I did, morning, noon, and night, was write. Of course, I had all the documents and everything in front of me. It was just a matter of now piecing it all together. I know many moms do write their story. For me, was a terrible experience. I don't really recommend it unless you want to do it for your children so they know the story, or at least know your side of the story. But it was traumatic. Each time I had to go back and back into the courtroom and to the people and what they said. It brought up a lot of old feelings and made me want to go seek revenge on them, and made me sick a lot of times, made me very emotional. And so it's not a place I really enjoyed going back to be honest with you. It just
I can relate.
So many old feelings. Yeah.
I can relate because I made the website about my daughter's case, and like you, I didn't do that without her permission. Before she was abducted, she actually asked me to let the world know what had happened to her and what was happening to her in case she would get abducted. And I waited a year before I did that because it's such a personal thing, and I didn't want to put that story out there. Her whole life is on there basically. But she did ask me, and when the contact was broken by her father, I realized that I had to follow her wish and put it out there. But it was extremely hard for me to write. It was it kind of re-traumatizes you because you have to re-experience the entire situation again. It's like rerunning the entire horror movie again.
Right. And
all the feelings that you go through, they come up as you write it. That said, I'm really happy that I did it because it's out there. Everyone can read it. Everyone can see it. The corruption, the maneuvering of these court involved people. It's all out there for people to see, which is the only way in which we can create change. At least that's what I'm hoping to contribute to, and I'm taking that's one of the reasons why you wrote your book as well.
I wrote my book, and I have to say, I listened to what you wrote, and you were spot on in the steps of how they take our children away. But I wrote my book because I really was hoping to warn younger parents, one, to stay out of the courtroom, because I went in very naively thinking justice would prevail, and unfortunately learned the real hard way that's furthest thing from the truth. And I tried to warn them about the pitfalls in the system and what to be aware of. So that was sort of my mission, is if I could allow or warn some other parents of, if you had the choice of doing this or this, and this could mean losing your child and not seeing them for years, what would you do then? And so I hope it made a difference.
So what is your advice if you were able to do the entire story over again? Would you have taken Brian outside of the country again? What would you have made a different choice?
I, of course, like many parents, go back over that a million times in my head, and there was nothing I could have done, and Brian and I have talked about that as well. I'd have to actually go back further and just say the only thing I could have done to have changed this was to never have asked for a divorce, was to have stayed married to his dad. That was really it. His dad is, he's one of those people, he actually enjoys revenge. It's a game for him, and he's good at it. He's good at what he does. And I was very naive. I'm an artist also, and so I was no competition to him. So there was nothing along the way that I didn't try that I could have tried. I mean, every suggestion I tried, everything. I mean, I don't know what could be suggested now to myself or anyone else. So if I had to suggest it, when moms do call me, though, and even dads occasionally, but mostly moms, I just tell them, if they're going to go to court and they're going to tell if there's abuse going on, physical, emotional, whatever abuse, I tell them, don't bring it up. Don't bring it up.
Well, what about if the child is? What about if the child is abused?
Well, I'll give you an example, and I've had this happen more than once, where the lawyer will say, let's bring in, because I'm on the court watch. We do the facts court watch, and we've sat in on many cases where there's physical evidence, doctor reports, everything. And I've seen time after time the judges just throw it out, say that's not, that has nothing to do with what's going on today. Well, I don't believe it, or we're not going to let that evidence in. So seeing that not just in my own case, but in many other cases, I basically say when you go in front of the judge, you tell the judge that you want the father to be in your child's life, that you think, it's important for the child to have a father, and you play everything else down. Now, some people don't agree with me, but it's been my experiences almost all the times I've been on cases and sat in on court watches where the mother has talked about the abuse. They've lost the child. They almost immediately lose the child to the father. I wish I could say otherwise, and some people will be angry at me saying, but there was real abuse. I mean, I sat in on a case where the older sister of a 3-year-old girl who was being molested by the father, where the 16-year-old came in from a previous marriage, testified against the father, had a lifetime restraining order against the father for having touched her sexually inappropriately. And the judge, what did he do? He said that didn't matter and awarded the 3-year-old to the father. I've seen this play many times before. But yet I've had calls from moms where I've told them, don't talk about it. You tell them you think it's important that the father has some kind of relationship with the child. And they've called me and said, thank you, I was able to retain custody. So that's been my experience. If you're lucky and you have a judge that you think is more sympathetic to you, or if you have a judge that will listen to the child if the child's old enough. I've only heard of children being able to talk is when the father asks for the children to talk. I've had several cases of that where they've asked if the child can speak. If the father's okay with it, then they'll speak. Then they'll let that happen. And I've been on lots of cases, so I know it's a touchy issue. I went to the National Organization of Women in New York, and they just pretty much told me, sorry, but, we know about this. There's really not much we can do. So it's not good advice. It's really the opposite of everything we're told is to tell about the abuse. They don't want to hear about the abuse. They want to take that. They want to use the Richard Gardner theory of you're just alienating the child against the father. This is all made up. That's how I see them use it. So my advice is, if you go into court and you tell the judge, yes, I think the father is important in the child's life and there should be some relationship, it's very hard for the judge to rule against you. How can you rule against that? Here's a mom. You can't be accused of PAS then, or whatever. Now it's parent alienation. You can't be accused of that because you're saying it on the record that you think this is okay, that it's important that dad's in the child's life. But if you go in and start talking about abuse and the judge is against you, if you're talking about the child being abused, they can say you made that all up. You made that up. You told the child to make that up. That's what they did in many cases, I know. I just seen that over and over. They don't have it like to stand on if you go in with the opposite. It's much harder to take the custody away if you're showing you're being a cooperative, good mother. That's what we have to do.
I tried that, but that didn't work. And when I presented expert evidence of molestation and abuse by the father, it was just ignored.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
So you ended up starting an organization called FACTS, Family Against Court Travesties. Tell us what you do with that organization.
Yes, we came together, 5 of us, women who were all losing our children or had lost our children to almost the same circumstances, using the same playbook. And we actually the National Organization of Women had sat in on a court watch and for another mother, and we contacted them, and we joined forces, and became this group, Families Against Court Travesties. And we decided the one thing we could do is do court watches. And when we noticed, and we've had the lawyers tell us, when we sit in on the court case, we don't talk, we don't testify. We do take notes, though, that when the judge knows he's being watched and notes are being taken, he tends to act a little more fairly. And in one circumstance, we've actually got a judge, actually a few times we got the judge to, not that, just our presence got the judge to sort of be a little bit more fair to the other party that he'd always been so unfair to, he or she. And in one case, we got a judge recused. The lawyer took one of our reports and sent it up to, I don't know if it was the appeals court, and said, here's an objective observer. And it made, they were able to get rid of the judge because they had no, stake in the game. So they were able to take that. So the court watch can be useful in that way. It's one of the things that we feel that we get some positive feedback or results from. Not every time, but nothing's a guarantee.
Yeah, I actually have organized some court watches as well, not only for my own case, but for other cases as well. And the Women's Coalition also organizes court watches for moms that have to go to court for their case. And we use Facebook for that and Twitter. So we basically put together a short message to the presiding judge and include emails and phone numbers. And then we have a couple of hundred moms call in or email. And moms show up in court. And that can be extremely helpful. In my particular case, the moms that came for the court watch in the last hearing that I went through were actually tossed out of the courtroom. And the courtroom was closed. Have you gone through that as well?
Yes. In Broward County, they like to have the family court hearings in the judge's chambers. This way they don't have to let people in. In my case, we got it's Freedom of Information. The newspapers have a group, and I called them, and they had to come. We had to file something, and the judge had to finally open the court. We shouldn't have to go through that, but we do go through that sometimes because that's how they get away with this stuff, is doing it behind closed doors. They don't want people to observe them, even though our jury system, our court system is set up so that the public can view it for the very reason of trust. But yes, in my trial, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
In my criminal trial, I had court watch there, and the judge actually made an announcement that if they didn't take off their badges, and if they said one word out in the hallway, that he'd have them arrested and thrown in jail. So these judges can get very full of themselves.
Yeah, that's a good thing to mention as well, because a lot of times the folks who show up for the court watches are other protective moms, and they have their own court cases, and often also in front of the same judge. So they have to be careful as well, right?
Well, that's true. And normally we don't recommend a mother to come if she's in front of that judge. Not to be there for the court. We don't recommend that. And we're lucky now we have a lot of women who aren't in court at all and never been in court who do come. They don't recognize those faces at all.
So for all the moms that are listening right now who are not in court cases and custody battles, please join us with these court watches, because your presence really makes a difference, right? And would you agree? Would you agree that all court proceedings should be digitally recorded, both via audio and video as well?
Absolutely. That would make a huge difference. And they shouldn't charge exorbitant fees. It's very, very cheap for them to do that. And they're actually keeping moms who usually end up being bankrupt by the time the system is, their case is almost over. It's not fair to them, because then they can't even afford to buy the transcripts to fight their case at a higher court.
Yeah, and it would also prevent these backroom deals in what they call closed chambers. What nonsense, right? All court proceedings should be out in the open, and there should always be a court reporter present who is digitally recording the audio and the video of all proceedings. In my opinion, I was actually. Yeah, go ahead.
That is the strongest bit of advice you can give to any mother, is always, always, always have a court reporter.
Mm-hmm.
If they have to scrape together all their nickels and dimes, get a court reporter if they don't have the digital system or the audio system.
Yeah, and for folks who call in, like myself, I call into the courtroom when there's a hearing. I record all the phone conversations when I call in, and I transcribe them myself. And that way, you can also record whatever hearing's going on your mobile phone, even though you're not supposed to. Just do it. That would be my advice.
Good advice. Good advice.
Yeah. Well, we've reached the end of the show. I want to thank you both for this, for the courage to talk about your particular story, and particularly Brian. I want to thank you for sharing your story. It's been amazing to hear the perspective of the child. So thank you both so much for being on, and I want to wish you both a wonderful Mother's Day tomorrow.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's truly been a pleasure, and it's been amazing to hear the perspective of a child survivor. That's been hard for me to find someone who's been willing to do that. So, very much appreciated. Please keep up the good work, Miriam, and I wish all the protective mothers out there a lot of strength this weekend, and I hope to have you all tune in again next week. So, bye-bye, everybody.